Bring in show music, please.
This is Squawk Pod from CNBC. I'm producer Cameron Costa, and on today's episode, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is headed for the capital. Who's attending his speech to Congress and who isn't? With the Genius of Israel co-author Dan Senor.
The idea that people are making a statement by not showing up is much bigger than Netanyahu. I think they're making a statement about Israel.
And the road that brought us to those blue screens of death. Is CrowdStrike and the rest of big tech too big to fail? Rand senior analyst Jonathan Welburn says maybe.
It's about identifying these type of companies that pose this type of risk and really coming up with some of the solutions to manage that risk before we're in a real state of crisis.
Plus, the fundraising race in the totally new presidential election, a blow against non-compete clauses, and the stock stories still being told like it's 2020.
I'm going to actually use the P word again, pandemic, because it's still having an effect.
It's Wednesday, July 24th, and Squawk Pod begins right now.
Stand Becky by in 3, 2, 1. Cue her, please.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Squawk Box right here on CNBC. We're live from the NASDAQ market site in Times Square. I'm Becky Quick along with Joe Kernen. Andrew is off today.
I'm looking at me. Looks like I enlisted yesterday, like stripes.
I'm
ready.
Nice cut. Nice cut.
Yes.
I'm getting one today.
Sergeant Carter, are you?
Yeah, I am.
Different for you than when you get it. It's not really
Longer. Takes a heck of a lot longer.
But it's a styling thing. It's not. This just was necessary to cut the gray off.
Trust me, this is necessary too.
Shares of Google parent Alphabet are lower. Earnings of $1.89 beat estimates by a nickel, and revenue was roughly in line with expectations. But if you look into the numbers, YouTube ad revenue was at $8.6 billion in a quarter. But that was short of the $8.9 billion that analysts had expected. Cloud revenue, however, was a bright spot. It surpassed $10 billion in a quarter for the first time. And operating profit topped $1 billion. But you can see the stock down significantly, and it's the NASDAQ is weaker as far as what the indicated open is this morning.
It's because where a lot of the growth has come from, too.
Those 7, yeah.
Right. If you take a look at shares of Visa, they are lower as well this morning. Quarterly revenue growth there actually fell short of what the street was expecting as well. This is a rare miss for the payments processor. Higher interest rates appear to have taken a toll on consumer spending. The company's CFO said that the high-spend consumers remained stable, but they did see a slight moderation in the lower-spend consumer segment. Payments volume growth also cooled down in its Asia-Pacific market. That was driven primarily by mainland China. Visa said the recovery in travel demand there is progressing slower than it had expected. We did get American Express earlier this week. They did a little bit better, but they also have a higher end consumer, and those were the ones that Visa said were still spending. Relating
to LVMH and also China. And also, I'm going to actually use the P word again, pandemic, because it's still having an effect on comps. So shares of LVMH slumping in France. The luxury group reported second quarter sales of $22.7 billion, another huge number, but the estimate was for $23.4 billion. Why? Chinese shoppers reining in spending on high-end fashion, and that offset a rise in demand in Western markets. Sales in that region, get this, tumbled in China, includes China, tumbled 14% year over year, and the company notes it's tough comps in China from 2023 when consumers were coming out of the pandemic and they splurged on luxury goods as they emerged from some of the pandemic lockdowns. So now it's a comparison thing. So it's below what, and we talk about that here too. You use the P word and the C word, pandemic and China. Yes, I did. So what's your point? Yes, that was good. Worked it all in together. Yeah, I'm not for sure what you're talking about. The LVMH report is weighing on other luxury stocks in European trade. It made me think, if I did go to boot camp, do they send you home like if you start crying, or if you just? I mean, I would make it seriously. No, I don't think they send you home. I think they send you to run laps again. They make it a little tougher. What happens if you just? In boot camp. What happens if you just beg and say, "I want my mommy," and? Soldier, on your knees. I wish, and I was in between things, Vietnam and other things, and I sometimes wish to have become a real man. I almost wish that I had served.
I don't think I'd ever wish for war, but going...
No, not war, just to have been...
You could sign up.
To have served and be able to say that, because it's nice. When people say that, I respect and admire and look at people.
As you should. It is
especially like Marines and stuff.
Any of them.
Yeah.
President, how are you feeling? How are you feeling since you dropped out of the race, sir?
And President Biden returned to the White House yesterday after recovering from COVID. He now faces the final 6 months of his presidency. It's a lame duck, but he looks good there. He has scheduled a primetime address from the Oval Office tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern, and you can watch full coverage on NBC. And I don't know how sick he actually got from COVID. There's so many weird things were swirling around, but it looks like a full recovery at this point.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, 81 with COVID in the first wave.
It would not have been
scary. But that was scary if you're 81 and
think back to those days.
Right.
Think back to those days before there were vaccines. Before
this is the third time he's had it, I think so. But and are you hearing it? I hear it's around again.
I do too. Yeah.
Like out where we live.
It's a much less serious outcome than we've seen in the past, unless you are older, unless you have an immune system that's challenged.
I had it in December. It was nothing. 2 days.
Last time I got it, I was still sick.
Yeah, I mean, like the flu.
Yeah.
On the president's agenda tomorrow, a high-stakes meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It's Netanyahu's first visit to Washington in almost 4 years. He's going to address a joint session of Congress this afternoon. It's very weird who's not attending, and there are a lot of people that are not attending, including Vice President Harris, but others as well. And they were, just watching the news yesterday, they're almost like pointing to people who are and aren't as whether you're truly
supportive of Israel.
Supportive of Israel or not. Yeah.
I mean,
people have other things to do, I guess.
Netanyahu is such a polarizing figure, too. Yeah, you can agree with supporting Israel and not necessarily agree with Netanyahu's plan for how he's taking on the war.
He's the head
internally in Israel.
It's a very important and good ally, not just in the Middle East, worldwide. Everything. In other political news, Donald Trump's campaign has filed a complaint with the Federal Election Commission. It accuses President Biden and Vice President Harris of violating campaign finance laws by rolling Biden's campaign funds over to Harris. The complaint comes after the Biden team amended the name of its committee on Sunday to Harris for President after President Biden dropped out of the race. Campaign finance legal experts are split on whether the transfer is permissible, and it's unclear what the FEC will decide.
Speaking of campaign finance, Elon Musk is denying a report that he plans to donate $45 million a month through a new super PAC to help former President Trump get back to the White House. In a new interview, Musk said that the report was simply not true and that he was not donating that amount. Musk later said on his X platform that he will make some donations to the PAC, but at a much lower level.
A tentative win for the Biden administration in its efforts to ban non-compete agreements. A federal judge rejecting an attempt to stop the FTC non-compete rule from taking effect in September. The challenge to the FTC was brought by a tree trimming company in Pennsylvania. That company, the lawsuit will be allowed to play out now that its bid for a preliminary injunction has been denied. Earlier this month, a different federal judge in Texas had blocked the FTC from enforcing the rule against a coalition of business groups. And you get a good tree trimmer. I mean, think about that. He can basically write his own paycheck. Why tree trimming?
Well, I don't agree with the FTC.
You have to be really good. I guess you have to be really good.
Well, but no, the bigger issue is this is a situation where hairdressers deal with this. If you leave the salon that you walked into,
that I understand.
You can't go anywhere in a 30-mile radius.
Similar to tree trimming, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. This is one thing where I think the FTC is on the right course. You shouldn't be able to tie people down and basically say you can't go anywhere and ever compete against us.
Right.
We'll see.
It impacts us, theoretically.
Well, it impacts people who are trying to get out on their own and do something, and they make them sign these non-competes the second they walk in the door, and then you can't work here unless you sign away your right to ever compete against us.
Right.
It's ridiculous.
Tree trimmers.
Tree trimmers, again, I go back to those hair salons because I hear this from every...
Maybe they're the ones that make those topiaries. That's
good.
a skill, huh?
That is pretty good.
That you'd pay a lot for someone that knows how to make those little bunnies and stuff.
Cheese will be next.
Up next on Squawk Pod, host of the Call Me Back podcast, Dan Senor. He's prepped for Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech to the U.S. Congress today, but some politicians, including Vice President Kamala Harris, won't be attending. Why Netanyahu is such a polarizing figure, and why his visit is so important in global geopolitics.
When you look at the public polling and public sentiment in Israel, you see two things. You see frustration with Netanyahu, but then when you drill down on what should the goals be of the Israeli government right now in this war, it's consistent with what Netanyahu's trying to pursue.
Welcome back to Squawk Pod from CNBC, today with Joe Kernen and Becky Quick.
Stand by, Joe. His mic, cue.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu scheduled to address a joint session of Congress this afternoon. He's looking to shore up support amid the continuing war in Gaza, which has claimed tens of thousands of lives. Netanyahu facing more dissatisfaction with his leadership at home in Israel. He's been under pressure to get a ceasefire deal done, also to try to bring back Israeli hostages and bring them home almost 10 months now after they were abducted by Hamas on October 7th. Joining us now, Dan Senor, a former foreign policy advisor in the George W. Bush administration. He's the host of the Call Me Back podcast and co-author of The Genius of Israel. Dan, haven't seen you in a while. It's good to have you on.
Good morning.
There are some people going today, and there's some people that aren't going. And I mean, obviously, everyone's talking about Vice President Harris not going to be in attendance. She's been outspoken and even diverged from the Biden administration on this issue to some extent. But Dick Durbin, what is he doing today, the second ranking member in the Senate? Are people not going because Netanyahu is polarizing, or
Well, I'd say a few things. First of all, I think Vice President Harris has known for months that this date was scheduled. The leadership of Congress, both houses of Congress, worked on this date with the Israeli government months ago. So she says she's a scheduling conflict. She chose to have a scheduling conflict. And obviously, given that she's now the presumed nominee of her party for president, you would think she could rearrange her schedule for one of America's most important allies, having their leader visit Congress. Regardless of what one thinks of Prime Minister Netanyahu, and I understand he's a polarizing figure. He's a polarizing figure in Israel, and he's a polarizing figure in the United States. But he represents a country, as I said, one of our most important allies in the world, certainly our most important ally in the Middle East, that is shattered, that has been under siege since October 7th. Worst day for the Jewish people, October 7th, of any day since the Holocaust. And when Prime Minister Netanyahu comes and addresses Congress today, you will hear a speech that almost any Israeli could agree with, any Jew in America could agree with, and almost any American could agree with, in terms of the stakes of this war, that it's not just about Israel, that it's civilizational, it's a civilizational struggle, that we share this common threat, who's the origin, the catalyst of this war in Israel, this multi-front war against Israel, which is Iran. And the U.S. and Israel and our allies in the Gulf need to do something about Iran. So he may be a polarizing figure, but his message is not, and his country is not. And the idea that people are making a statement by not showing up is much bigger than Netanyahu. I think they're making a statement about Israel, and I think they're making a statement about their attitude towards Jews.
And you don't need to be Jewish to be a Zionist either.
Absolutely.
You definitely do not.
Absolutely.
I'm not Jewish, but I would call myself a Zionist. I don't.
And as an American who's focused on America's interests in the world, right? You can list on one hand the most important allies to America in the world.
So what's your grade for the Biden administration? Some people say they've been great. I think you'd start telling people whether they can or can't use weapons, or holding back on weapons, or saying, well, quid pro, if you do this, you're not going to get him. If you do this, you will get him. I think that's all BS. And I'd give him, would you give him a B?
I'll tell you this. In the early days of the war, I think the Biden administration was extraordinary. They deployed military assets to the region. President Biden made a strong statement standing shoulder to shoulder with Israel. He traveled to Israel.
Seems like a no-brainer.
Well, that was important.
But traveling was one thing.
But I will tell you, somewhere between late December and kind of March, April, something happened in the administration where the administration started to turn. It got particularly bad kind of around March, April, where the administration did not veto that UN Security Council resolution.
And who knows who that is, Dan?
Greenlit that Security Council.
Do you have any? Who is that? It's not Biden. Who knows? Who decided that?
I think it was ultimately Biden who decided to do it.
Really?
He was under enormous pressure from progressives within his own party, and he made it was mostly a political decision. You had Senator Schumer deliver that terrible speech on the floor of the Senate that the administration knew about. But here's why it matters. It has been widely reported, I've heard this from senior officials within the intelligence community in Israel and the United States, that Yehia Sinwar, the architect, one of the two architects of October 7th, follows events in the United States closely. He follows politics here closely. And when he sees a breach between the U.S. government and the Israeli government, his incentive to negotiate a deal goes down. Because he says, wait a minute, pressure's mounting on Israel. It's not mounting on Hamas. And so to your point, Joe, when the U.S. does things like hold back some munitions, starts to put on conditions for the distribution of munitions to Israel, when they see these crazy protests and these student encampments on U.S. college campuses, the leaders of Hamas say, the world is beating up on Israel. The world is mounting on Israel. Let's stand back. Why do we have to come to the negotiating table?
But wait a second. This is not just a split between the United States and Israel. This is a split within Israel itself with Benny Gantz and the rest. I mean, this is a lot of that can be placed back on Netanyahu's head.
So Netanyahu is very unpopular right now. I'm not going to dispute that. But if you think about the big strategic goals that the Israeli government has had, which is eliminating Hamas's capacity to do another October 7th, not allowing Hamas to be in a capacity to have a base of operations, and getting the hostages back. Those goals is where most of the Israeli public is.
But some of the hostage families are mad.
Absolutely.
Too, for what Netanyahu has done.
I speak to hostage families on almost a weekly basis. Really. I mean, sometimes more than... I'm in touch with a lot of hostage families. What they're going through is excruciating. Every one of them that is extremely frustrated with their prime minister, with their government, with the whole security apparatus that somehow, on their watch, October 7th happened. I do not for a second guess their I just can't imagine what they're going through. But when you look at the public polling and public sentiment in Israel, you see two things. You see frustration with Netanyahu, but then when you drill down on what should the goals be of the Israeli government right now in this war, it's consistent with what Netanyahu's trying to pursue. So I do think it's a little paradoxical. It's understandable to be frustrated. At the same time, Israel cannot allow Hamas to be in a situation where it has a base of operations to wage war against Israel again.
We got about a minute left. Trump shared a letter he got from Mahmoud Abbas, and it's a peace overture, according to some. Does that? He's also meeting with Netanyahu. So, how do you see? Would Israel be mad that he's corresponding with Abbas, or is it?
I mean, first of all, the letter's innocuous. Basically, Abbas says, "I'm glad the assassin wasn't successful."
That's something I don't think you'd hear that from Iran.
Yeah, that's
Iran
true.
would say, "Damn, they missed,"
right.
like some people in this country.
No, I think it's innocuous. President Trump. I mean, we talk about a polarizing figure. Many people can disagree about and debate about President Trump's legacy, but on Israel and the Middle East, and I was just recently speaking to a number of leaders in the Gulf states. They all agree that the Trump administration's record in the Middle East and Israel was pretty extraordinary. The Abraham Accords, moving the embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. So, again, these leaders don't get involved in American...
Coming from a big bushy, that's like the best thing anyone's ever said from that administration.
These leaders in the Gulf and in Israel are not going to insert themselves in American politics, but there is a sense that the legacy of the Trump administration on the issues they care about is pretty extraordinary, and they are frustrated with some of the things that have come out of the Biden administration, especially from Kamala Harris. So, she has time now in the next few months to try to signal a different course. But not showing up
Yep.
today is a mistake.
Well, if my co-anchor was here, he'd ask you, are you ready to endorse President Trump right now?
I am not making endorsements in U.S. politics.
You're a wuss. Well,
No, I'm not.
You still got the
What are you doing?
Still got
What
the
are you doing?
I'm not allowed to say. Yeah, people have no idea where I stand.
I heard you the other day very critical of.
I try. But I mean, I'm a capitalist.
Yes.
You know what I mean? It's not that hard
am
to
I.
figure things out.
Right.
Which is why I get so confused when I see.
I know.
What goes on. Dan Senor, thank you.
Thanks. Good to be with you guys.
Thanks, Dan.
Coming up on Squawk Pod, are some tech players too big to fail? RAND's Jonathan Welburn penned an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, arguing that the global IT outage was in part because CrowdStrike is just too big.
It's not just about market share, that CrowdStrike had a really large market share. It's that CrowdStrike and some of the other companies, especially in the tech sector, have just become either really large, really interconnected, or as we saw with CrowdStrike, really hard to substitute when they do fail.
Plus, how can we fix it? Right after this break. You're listening to Squawk Pod. Here's Joe Kernen.
Delta Airlines CEO Ed Bastian just out with an update on the recovery from the CrowdStrike global IT outage. He says delays and cancellations were down 50% on Tuesday compared to Monday. And cancellations today will be minimal, and it expects operations to fully return to normal by tomorrow. Better for you and for me.
Flying Delta?
Delta Air France,
Friday, yeah.
like both. You're Friday, I'm Saturday,
Yeah.
I think. Bastian again apologized to customers for the disruption and said the airline would take care of those impacted with meals, hotel rooms, and ground transportation. He also said those customers could be or would be awarded some Sky Miles and travel vouchers as a further
I still don't understand
gesture of an apology.
What happened? Why was it so much worse at Delta? Other than they just rely on Microsoft more, but it still seems, most airlines were up and able to get things back under control that day. Talking about days and days of these delays that then sort of, I know what you said yesterday, what the Wall Street Journal was reporting about not being able to find crew, but
they didn't know where the crew were, yeah.
They weren't the only ones who were down to pen and paper working to figure out scheduling on this.
Bastian did not offer admission to that new spiffy lounge, which is what, of course, then if you let everyone in, then it's no longer
special.
No longer special. Our next guest warning that the concept of too big to fail isn't unique to finance. He says it also encompasses technology, as evidenced by last week's global tech outage traced to CrowdStrike. Join us now to talk about what can be done about this issue. Jonathan Welburn, senior analyst with RAND. What needs to be done in your view, Jonathan? Just spread the work out to some other players, or is it about, I don't know, the right type of cybersecurity? What should we do?
Well, yeah, certainly. I always will agree with the right type of cybersecurity. I think that is always needed. Ironically, this time, this outage came from a cybersecurity company issuing an update to its software that caused a large outage. But the real challenge that I'm highlighting here is it's not just about market share, that CrowdStrike had a really large market share. It's that CrowdStrike and some of the other companies, especially in the tech sector, have just become either really large, really interconnected, or as we saw with CrowdStrike, really hard to substitute when they do fail, causing widespread damages that can put other things at risk, can put economic security at risk, can put national security at risk. So I think it's about identifying these type of companies that pose this type of risk and really coming up with some of the solutions to manage that risk before we're in a real state of crisis.
That's what I was thinking, Jonathan, that as bad as it was, can the silver lining be that it was a wake-up call? Because that was like a test run. So now we better figure out exactly, how to make sure this doesn't happen again. Does it mean in different companies than just CrowdStrike? That's, I guess, the point of this segment. Do we need other people involved?
Yeah, so I think it's a silver lining as long as we use this opportunity and take that wake-up call and actually move forward and make some progress and actually, managing and pushing policy around the systemic risk. It's not just CrowdStrike. There's, dozens to hundreds of companies who are all very central in our highly interconnected economy, and they all could pose this type of risk. I think you're absolutely right that with CrowdStrike, we had this blue screen of death that many people woke up to, and some people are still facing. That's not the worst that it could be. So I agree. This is a potentially a nice opportunity to really put some focus on this.
Jonathan, when the cybersecurity companies go to a Fortune 500 company and say, look, we got this, we got that, is it an easy sell, or is it part of the, does it hit margins when they do it? I mean, everybody's spending all this money on AI. I guess it's going to pay off eventually, but it seems like I would maybe do this with my existing business to get it completely hack-proof or whatever. I would do that, but is there a hesitancy that it costs money and they take shortcuts?
Yeah, I mean, with the caveat that I'm overhearing research at Rand and not making those decisions at companies. The reality is I hope that it's not just looked at as purely a cost, that it's not purely an operating expense, that this is the necessary thing that companies need to be doing, need to be making sure that they're able to protect their systems and defend against cyber attacks, which companies are facing every day. Some companies into thousands of cyber attacks, and the fact is that relying on companies like CrowdStrike is actually a good thing. Now, I think that there should be policies in place to make sure that updates like this one are rolled out, are actually tested before they're rolled out. I'm not sure exactly what happened in this case, but I think that that's a type of thing that could make sure that these, we don't get this type of a widespread outage from a single update.
Is there a way to protect against truly horrific I mean, there was never going to be the financial system was never going to collapse. It almost did. We were going to never have a global pandemic again, and we did. You read about a pulse, or let's say a nuclear explosion in the atmosphere above the United States that knocks out the grid. Is there anything that we can totally protect against? Is there a way to do that, or is that always looming in the future? That something like that could still be done?
I think the biggest problem is when these incidents catch us by surprise. So I think in time and time again, we often wait until the worst happens in order to do something. What I'm really calling for and was calling for in this piece is to kind of look ahead and think about this. We may not be able to predict, that next pulse or that next pandemic. However, I think that we can identify the real choke points, in this point, we're pointing to systemically important entities that are out there, and make plans for how they're able to actually manage that next shock, that next surprise that happens, whether it be a cyber attack or a pandemic, and make sure that we're able to make our overall system more resilient. One of the problems that you can see with these types of risks is that they're systemic. They aren't risks that any single organization can manage by themselves because they're going to quickly spread across from those organizations, across their networks, across their company connections, across their products. And so it's not something that a single organization can manage. It's not something you can diversify away from. It really has to be, this is where we really start looking at the role of government in order to manage these type of risks.
Very good. All right. Jonathan, we appreciate it from Rand.
Thank you so much.
Rand Corp. I just like saying Rand Corp. It just makes me feel smart. Yeah, from years and years of high tech. Thank you. Appreciate it.
You think about Delta having so much of their system, so many of their systems leveraged to Microsoft, makes you wonder if it will make companies more reluctant to have one partner, if they want multiple partners to be able to have redundancies that go across some of these things too.
That does it for Squawk Pod today, this Wednesday. Thank you for listening. Squawk Box is hosted by Joe Kernen, Becky Quick, and Andrew Ross Sorkin. Weekday mornings on CNBC starting at 6 a.m. Eastern. Get the very best of our TV show right into your ears when you follow Squawk Pod wherever you like to listen to your podcasts. We'll meet you back here tomorrow.
We are clear. Thanks, guys.